So in my group we're interested in trying to track drugs, where they come from, and particularly looking at the presence of drugs in schools. So this is a device that we've developed for detecting spice and THC in vapes and vape liquids, and actually in edibles as well. And the idea is that police forces or other groups can have something like this so that they can test what's coming out of the school. So, you know, Rachel will show us. We know this is one of our spice liquids, for example. It's that unlabelled, unbranded bottle, which is so almost always spice. And we can just squirt a little bit of that material onto a little paper disc here. And what it's going to do is we kind of spread it out on that paper disc a little bit, and then it shines a bright ultraviolet light on the sample, and what we're looking for is what's called the fluorescence of the drug that we then detect. So it's going to go through a cycle of checking for spice and THC, and then even some other drugs that we kind of look for. So, you know, it takes like 10-30 seconds depending. So that bright red light that's come up there, that's indicative of it being spice. If it was THC, it would go purple, and then we have other colours for other drugs.
Could you tell us what spice is? Could you sort of explain it?
So spice is a synthetic man-made drug, and it was originally developed to try and kind of be a mimic of cannabis, so to work in the same way in the brain that cannabis does. But quite quickly people realised that it carried a lot of risks with it, so it never really became a drug that we really use. And it's a drug that we'll now see is really commonly used in prisons and common with people who are homeless. So essentially people that are incredibly vulnerable.
So it's cheap. And why is it so much more dangerous? What's so potent about it? Is it its strength?
Yeah, so the way it acts in the brain is a much stronger effect than THC, the psychoactive component of cannabis, acts in a much stronger way. So it gives rise to symptoms that are much more aggressive. So psychosis and seizures, and it can cause cardiac arrest as well. So it's considered a really risky drug, but particularly it's incredibly addictive. So people who use heroin and use spice will say that spice withdrawal is like heroin withdrawal. And so it's an incredibly addictive drug, which kind of goes to make it ever more risky, particularly when we start talking about teenagers using it.
And is it right that it doesn't smell or taste? It's very difficult to detect.
So what we find in prison is that it's soaked onto paper and smoked. But what we find in schools is that it's sold, made up into a vape liquid, and then sold usually as a fake cannabis or a THC vape. So all it will smell of is vape liquid. So it doesn't have a characteristic cannabis-like smell. It's actually got nothing to do with cannabis, so you can't detect it by its odour.
You found with your research that vapes confiscated now from more than 100 schools, from different geographical regions across the country, that basically 13%, and in some regions 1 in 4 of those vapes that have been confiscated, or the e-liquids handed in, contain spice.
That's right.
Now we know that I don't think any of those students have knowingly bought that as a spice e-liquid or a spice vape, have they?
Probably a very small number, yeah.
So how can we protect, you know, if somebody is buying e-liquids online, what should they look out for? How can they tell that there's spice in that liquid rather than dope or what they think is cannabis or something a bit more benign?
Yeah, and I think, you know, on social media where you'll see this sold, it's always called a THC liquid. So, and if it presents as something like this, you know, truly a vape liquid and moves around like a liquid, and there's lots of videos of them, it will not be THC, it will be spice. If it's an unlabelled bottle like this, it will be spice, never THC. Another indication, I think, is the price. You know, if it's maybe £10-20 for this 10 millilitre bottle, then it'll be spice. Whereas if it's THC, if that's what someone's seeking, then it's going to be much more like a thick oil or a brown, almost like a resin, right? But these kind of true THC pens, it might be something like £60. And this goes to the reason that it's marketed as THC, because for lots of young people, they don't view it as particularly risky or a normal part of adolescent life. But actually, very few teenagers have got a spare £60. But actually, if it's just a few pounds to fill up a vape, then there's much more chance.
And what are the side effects of using spice, you know, by mistake, you know, like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, they can be quite acute. So psychosis, so really big changes in behaviour, seizures in particular. Lots of teenagers collapse after they use it, can have heart problems. We've had reports of people stop breathing, things like that. So it's really very, very risky.
Okay, and THC is illegal as well,
Yeah.
yeah? And we're very worried about the effect of THC on the teenage brain. Could you just tell us what its effects are?
Yeah, so particularly in teenagers, THC can change that kind of teenage brain because it's still developing, and it can cause longer term psychiatric problems through someone's life that can include psychosis or schizophrenia or kind of pervasive longer term psychiatric problems.
And I presume because they're illegal, you don't know what the strength is of the THC in them?
Yeah, they can. So this is an example of a few pens, but you really won't know how strong they are, and it can vary hugely. And of course, the stronger it is, the riskier it is. Yeah.
And THC is the psychoactive element, yeah, of
That's right.
cannabis.
So cannabis, you have THC and you have CBD. CBD is legal in this country; it doesn't really do anything. THC is illegal because it's a strong psychoactive drug.
Brilliant. And can we talk a little bit about, I think quite a lot of people are confused now that disposable vapes are banned, what the new disposable pods look like, and therefore if somebody's using them, how they can maybe buy the refillable liquids more safely.
Yeah. So this is an example of these kind of, if you like, devices that have come to replace the true disposables. So here, this would have been what you would have bought and you just throw it in the bin, but now you buy essentially a battery and a set of different pods that you can put in there. Right, so sometimes you can actually fill these up with your own liquid again, which is how the SPICE liquid would be used to fill it up. And they present in a bunch of different ways. There's loads of different brands that do that. I think the reality is the only way you can be really confident, particularly if you're buying a liquid, the only way you can be really confident that it's not risky to you is if you buy it in a reputable shop. That's just really the only means. If you're buying on social media, I think it does carry a risk with it.
So the safest choice, if somebody is vaping, that they buy their e-liquid or anything refillable in as bigger or safer shop as they possibly can.
If you can, but of course they technically shouldn't be serving you because it's still illegal to purchase. Yeah.
For if somebody's under the age of 18.
That's right, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in terms of, we know that a lot of vapes are given to teenagers and shared. So we would like to sort of say that we want teenagers to think almost that sharing a vape is a little bit like drink spiking, that you can never know what you're being offered. So what sort of tips do you think we could give?
I think that's exactly right. We'll see lots of cases where somebody will offer someone a vape, say, try this, you'll like it, and it's actually spice, and then they collapse. I hear that story a lot. So peer-to-peer dealing is actually quite common for spice. We've certainly seen examples of some vapes where it's a system where you can change the chamber that it vapes.
The twister vapes.
Yeah, but one side's been normal and one side's been spice. And you really worry about that in terms of using that to spike someone, because the worry you have is because it makes you, kind of not in your body and can make you collapse, you're really, really vulnerable at that point. So I do think of it exactly like spiking, and I think that is that message to say, don't be sharing vapes. Yeah.
So especially at parties or like going off to Freshers Week, outside the pub, if somebody you've recently met, even like first dates, to be as mindful as you would be with your drink, really.
I think if you treat it exactly how you treat drink spiking, treat it in exactly the same way.
Same way, that's really, really helpful. If somebody's offered a vape liquid or sees a vape liquid, what are the top tips for being able to tell whether it's got spice in it?
So about half the time it's a liquid that's a bright colour, and actually commercially they just aren't sold as bright colours. So that would be, your first thing. An unlabelled, unbranded, plain bottle exactly like this, that would be how they're sold really on social media. But it can be, if you like, a normal vape liquid colour, but then your clue is really that it's just a completely unbranded bottle. It won't smell of anything in particular other than just vape liquid, so you don't kind of get a clue there.
How could somebody tell if it's a THC vape?
So if it's a THC vape, it will almost always actually be in a vape pen. So whereas our spice liquids are going to be usually in a bottle and it's truly a liquid, actually it's usually already in a pen, and it's going to be a thick oil or almost like a resin that just doesn't move when you turn it upside down. It's often in a branded pen, often with a cannabis symbol or some other allusion to cannabis on it. And the volume's really, really low, so they usually only hold about a milliliter, whereas if we took a pen designed for a liquid, a vape liquid, it's designed for a couple of millilitres, so the volume's much lower. But also, it'll smell strongly of cannabis. If you're familiar with that smell, it's another easy way to identify these. It's a really expensive product, so only 1% of what we find in schools are THC vapes, because they're about £60 for a vape, whereas 13% of what we find is actually spice, just because it's so much vastly cheaper. So they're more rare, but they're very easy to identify.
So in summary, in a sense, if it's spice, it's going to be a liquid, but that liquid could have been put into the new form of disposable of reusable vapes. Yeah. If it's THC, it's more likely to be a sort of pre-filled, quite elegant, expensive vape pen.
Yeah, exactly right. Looking out for in your schools. If you're seeing this kind of bottle in your school, it's almost 100% spice.
But if it's actually already pre-filled in a vape pen, is there a way of spotting, because it doesn't smell?
Yeah, all you can look for is a bright colour. So if it looks like blue, green, red, then very likely to be spice. Only about half the time is it a very bright colour. The rest of the time it's kind of brown or yellow like normal vape liquid, but it gives you some indication.
And if a school or setting is worried about some of the products that it's confiscated, what can we advise them to do? Yeah, usually I think you want to get some sort of support either from a youth drug and alcohol charity or even from the police. So all the police forces we work with are great. They're never interested in criminalising young people, but they've got a really good sense of what this material looks like and what the risks are like in the area, and so you should be able to be passed on to them. I think, if you get something like this, it's spice, no question. And then you can have a bit of a helpful dialogue, hopefully, with that young person that you found it with, particularly thinking about their local circumstance, whether they're at a higher or greater risk depending on their family background. So basically what I'm worried about with teachers is any savvy kid is just going to pre-filled, aren't they? Yeah, they do. And the truth is, well, what we get in schools, half of the fines look like that and half of the fines look like that. And that's really difficult because you just aren't going to know. But what usually they'll have is there's some behavioural change that's associated with the vaping that's really weird.